Grüß Gott in Österreich, guten Morgen. Ich heiße Sie herzlich willkommen zu diesem Online-Seminar über E-Commerce in Australien. Mein Name ist Karl Hartleb, ich bin der Wirtschaftsdelegierte für Australien und Neuseeland der Wirtschaftskammer Österreich und leite hier einen dieser mehr als 100 Stützpunkte in der österreichischen Wirtschaft, die die Außenwirtschaft Österreich für Sie betreibt. Ich bedanke mich sehr herzlich für das große Interesse. Wir werden diese Veranstaltung in Englisch abhalten, weil die Expertinnen und Experten aus Australien stammen. I would like now to switch to English and also say welcome to all our expert speakers from Australia and actually in this case also from the UK. Thank you very much for your support. Why do we put on an e-commerce Australia seminar? There's several reasons for that. Australia is an important market for Austria. Actually in 2019, a record year for our exporters, Australia was number 4 overseas market for the Austrian businesses. Australia manages COVID better than many other countries. The virus is under control, and even though Australia, after 29 years, has been facing a recession in 2020, the signs are up that the economy is picking up again, driven by consumers and driven by spending in the digital space. E-commerce has gone through the roof during the COVID crisis, and it's a trend to stay. And I think it's a trend that Austrian companies, in particular those who are already active in English-speaking countries and sell internationally via their platforms, should know about and should use. This expert seminar offers you the opportunity to learn, but obviously also to connect and get back to us and our speakers after the seminar. I would like to start by introducing our first speaker. He's representing Amazon. Amazon is a relatively new kid to the block here in Australia, but it's obviously a successful one. Alexander Magen from London is joining us and will explain us a bit what Amazon is doing here and what it might be able to do for you. Alexander.
Hi, Carl.
Welcome, good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to be here to be able to speak to you all about this exciting opportunity to move out to Australia, specifically with Amazon. Cool. So just a little introduction to myself. So my name's Alex. As Carl said, I'm based in the UK, based in London. I'm an account manager that helps EU-based businesses expand to Amazon Australia. Cool. So selling globally in Australia. So why sell globally? The first step is to decide where you want to sell, and then check the requirements. So there's a number of different reasons why someone would want to move to Australia. The first is to create a brand new revenue stream. By growing a new customer base, you get access to a wealth of new customers. If you move through Amazon, you can obviously leverage our website and all of the customers we already have. And then you can also maximize potential by using the tools we have available in the market. So like Carl said, Amazon is pretty new to the block when it comes to Australia. We moved in there about 3 years ago now. The growth has been pretty tremendous. It's at a really pivotal and exciting point at the moment where it's big enough to have a lot of potential and you can make a lot of money there, but it hasn't gotten to that point where it's really saturated with sellers. So that means there's a new business moving in, especially from Europe. There's a lot of space and a lot of potential. So it's a really exciting time and a really good time to sort of move in, take up that competitive advantage, get in there first, and then hopefully grow with the market. And if you move in through Amazon, grow with Amazon in the market. So Amazon Global Selling, how does it work? So the first step is to decide where you want to sell. So for this example would be Australia. Your next step would be to register and list your products in Australia. Then you would just choose your fulfillment method. So you have 2 options. You could do your own fulfillment or you could do fulfillment by Amazon. And then finally, you've got to manage that business, leverage all the tools we have on the website to make sure you're making the most of the opportunity. So why sell in Australia? So as I've gone over already, it's a really interesting market, a really exciting market to me in the moment. You can obviously gain that competitive advantage. There's a huge prime adoption in Australia and a huge swing towards e-commerce over the last couple of years. So it's a really good time and exciting time to be moving in there. So how to get started in Australia. So if you want to register for Amazon Australia, you have three main options. So number one is just to go to amazon.com.au yourself and register. Number two, if you've already got an Amazon account set up, you can register through going to inventory, sell globally, Asia Pacific, and Australia, and you can register that way. And the last option, if you do want an account manager, like myself, if you let me know, I will send you across a registration link like you can see on the screen here, and then you can register through that link. Excuse me. So I'm going to briefly go over logistics. I know Kai's going to go into more detail later, but I'm going to speak a bit about from an Amazon perspective. So there's two types of shipping when it comes to Amazon Australia. You can do your own fulfillment there. So that's when you list your products on Amazon Australia, people buy them, and once they're purchased, you will send and ship the stuff out to the final customer. And the other option is FBA. So your own fulfillment, MFN, is a really interesting, exciting opportunity. You don't have any risk because obviously you're not sending the stock out to Australia. However, because of the high shipping costs and the high shipping times from places like Europe, it can sometimes not be the most competitive. And generally, that's why I encourage people to do FBA if they can. In Australia, there's a few things that are really important to remember. It's a really, really big country and it's quite spread out. So delivery time can vary quite a lot depending on the place. If you're doing your own fulfillment, that delivery time can change quite a lot. If you're doing with FBA, it's pretty set. Cool. So just going over how FBA works. So this is fulfilled by Amazon. So essentially, you send the stock from wherever you're based or wherever your manufacturer is based out to one of our fulfillment centers in Australia. When you go to create your shipping order, it will tell you which one. At the moment, we have 4, one in Melbourne, one in Sydney, one in Brisbane, and one in Perth. So you would send the stock out to one of the fulfillment centers. We would then distribute the stock in and amongst all of our fulfillment centers. When the customer buys and purchases the product, we will pick, pack, and ship that product to the final customer. And then we'll deal with returns, any customer service issues, anything like that, so you don't have to worry about it. That's obviously a huge advantage because there's a massive time difference between, Austria and Europe and Australia. So you don't have to be dealing with that kind of stuff, which is obviously great and makes things a lot easier and a lot quicker. So there are obviously fees associated with FBA. So on the screen here, you'll see I think this is from last year, these fees. So if you want to go and check them yourself, if you just type into Google, amazon.com.au FBA fees, you'll be able to find all this stuff. Cool. So obviously, like I said, I'm an account manager that helps EU-based businesses expand to Amazon Australia. If you are interested in moving into that space and you do want an account manager to help you, if you want to send an email over to eu.au-marketplace-referral@amazon.com, if one of the account managers has the capacity, they'll reach out to you and they'll be able to help you. And what that is a free service that runs in calendar years. So if you decide to launch now in Australia, you would have an account manager for the entirety of 2021. And they would just be there to sort of help that expansion, help you understand the market with marketing and strategic advice, but also be a bit of an escalation point if you're having any issues on the platform and you've got any questions or anything you're unsure about. Perfect. That's everything I wanted to speak to about Amazon Australia. I'm excited to hear your questions later. In the meantime, I'll pass you back to Carl. Thank you guys so much.
What is very interesting expose. Austrian viewers might be surprised to hear that Amazon is only here for 3 years. I've been able to follow this development. It was a spectacular market entry, but there's obviously industry holding against it. And I think we will hear within this seminar the options that are there on the market. You have mentioned, Alexander, the logistics side. That's important. And I'm very pleased that we have the global chair of Seiko's e-commerce division, Kai Lincoln, with us today. Seiko is an international logistic company with an extensive experience in e-commerce, but also a proven track record. And I'm very glad, Kai, that you can join us today. And we're very excited to hear about what your company could do for Austrian clients looking to enter the Australian market. Up to you, Kai.
All right, great. Thank you, Carl. So I'm going to try and not make this too Seco salesy. Just to give people a bit of an idea of who we are. So Seco is a US-based company, about $1 billion in size. So not tiny, but also not enormous to the point where we're fairly detached from what's happening on the ground. They have an interesting shareholder model. So as managing director and founder of the original business here that Seco acquired, I'm still a shareholder in Australia, and they really tout their local knowledge as being part of the greater Seco group. So they don't fly in people from the States to run their different divisions overseas. They really try and have local people running it, and that provides a lot of advantage around what's happening in the local market, what's required from a logistics point of view. As Alex mentioned, Australia presents some unique challenges with 20-odd million people, but the size of the physical United States, we don't have the density that really helps to make supply chain efficient. And so we have to come up with other ways that help us work through things and make it work best for customers. So I'll just move through to the next slide and just give you a bit of an idea on what Seco does in terms of their services. So we're a multinational freight forwarder. So we do have international shipping, a number of countries, 40 countries, 120 different offices, ocean and air freight, customs, and those sort of things. So many of you are already probably purchasing or selling things internationally. So you're used to dealing with or have dealt with a freight forwarder. So, you get a general idea of what we do when it comes to international shipping and the customs part. Local warehousing is a big part of Seco's service offering, where they have regionally positioned warehouses to do pick, pack, and fulfillment, in Europe, in the US, the UK, Hong Kong, China, down here in Australia and New Zealand. B2c and B2b deliveries. So this is where we start to get into actually getting deliveries to the store or to a warehouse. So we'll deal with clients that are shipping into an Amazon FBA warehouse, for example, and the goods still have to get to Australia. They still have to get customs cleared and delivered out to the warehouse before it gets handed over, and Alex and his team can look after things. So that's the business to business side delivery, so more bulk deliveries, and then also the B2C, which is your package level deliveries to your end consumer when they've ordered something online. We manage both deliveries domestically as well as international cross-border. So I'll touch on that a little bit in one of my further slides. And then with e-commerce, obviously returns is a big part of it. Alex mentioned it, and it's great when you do have a supplier like Amazon who does provide you returns. If you're trying to do more of the supply chain activity yourself or the fulfillment yourself, having a return solution is pretty important these days with e-commerce. Returns rates, depending on your commodities, can range anywhere from 5% up to 30% with fashion. So making it fairly painless for your customers is pretty critical if you want return shopping or repeat shopping. So that's sort of where we play in those spaces there. And I'll just give you a bit of an example of what we do in e-commerce, I guess, in terms of providing some context and comfort that we actually know what we're talking about. So when it comes to e-commerce fulfillment, we have a platform where we recognize the importance of the consumer delivery journey is with the retailer, not Seco Logistics. So where a retailer is using us directly for freight, so not where you're using a marketplace like an Amazon, but if you're the retailer and you're selling directly, we offer branded tracking portals so that you can send a tracking link to your customers and they can track it using the same customer experience that they received when they bought the product. We have banners on there that you can manage yourself. So if you're running specials, new products, free shipping, etc., the client can, or the customer can click on that banner and it has a URL behind it that takes them directly back to the website, wherever you want them to be on that website. So if it's a specials or a sales, it can take them there. If it's a new product, it can take them there. So all that's controlled and managed by the retailer, and it's just part of the service that we offer. So again, less for a marketplace if you're using an FBA, more if you're doing direct fulfillment yourself, either locally or internationally. And then I mentioned this, and it's though it may be a small portion of what you're doing, having a global return solution, especially if you're fulfilling directly from Austria, say, to Australia, or if you've got goods sitting in a warehouse in the US or somewhere else in mainland Europe, having a return solution that has a regional, local service offering, making the return get back processed faster, the credits are issued faster, back to the customer, it's all fairly important. And we have a returns portal offering, as well as then the returns processing and the first mile returns in another number of countries around the world, including Australia, obviously. So that's sort of the service offering, again, without being too salesy. But I really just want to get into this portion of the conversation, and then hopefully this leads to some questions. And I think that's where we're going to get into what's really important for all the viewers. What are your questions for the services that you're talking about or wanting here? So Alex talked about marketplace fulfillment. So fulfillment by Amazon is obviously one of the most globally recognized that you're going to get. And it is having huge uptake now in Australia after only arriving here several years ago. There are a couple of local marketplaces as well, which you can find fairly easily on the internet. And you had a look, for Australian marketplaces, and they offer similar services to Amazon. There's no reason you can't put your product on multiple sites as well, in case there's some consumers that are loyal to one of the marketplaces over another one. So marketplace fulfillment is by far the easiest way to enter a country with inventory on ground in country and having fast fulfillment times, because you don't have to worry about your cross-border. Obviously, there's a captive audience already. They're already shopping from these marketplaces. You don't need to spend a bunch of money on marketing yourself to get it noticed. You might need to do some things on Amazon to get it noticed, or on the marketplace to get it brought up on the rankings, but it's a good entry point. Obviously, there's cost of inventory holding if you bring product down here and it doesn't sell. But that's a risk that you're going to have with business anywhere if you're buying inventory and trying to sell it. And then you're potentially limiting your sales if you're sticking to one or two platforms, because you don't want to have inventory spread across too many places. So it's all part of the risk and the benefit. Direct to marketplace selling using a 3PL. So finding a fulfillment warehouse down here in Australia, putting inventory on the ground, and asking them to take care of your delivery is another option. So you might want to do that if you've already got a strong brand, if you've got a website that you're happy with how it operates. There's no reason you couldn't do that as well as using marketplaces. There's a lot of Australian retailers that sell their own goods on marketplaces as well as through their own native sites. Obviously gives you multiple selling options with maximum exposure, but we come back to that same potential negative of having inventory holdings without moving. And depending on your product, if you're selling electronic goods, they may go obsolete fairly quickly, and you don't want to have goods dwelling in inventory for too long if they're not moving. And then the final option, and Alex touched on this, the biggest negative of this one is direct selling from offshore. You could do your own localized website where you're you've got a .com.au website, for instance, what I mean by localized, or a .com/au, but for an Australian shopper, it feels like they're in an Australian environment. They're buying in Australian currency. The language is in Australian English rather than American English. Those sort of things can help when you're running those websites. You can also direct sell from offshore marketplaces as well, obviously. But what I'm talking about here is you doing it yourself, selling directly and using maybe social media or SEO, some sort of marketing to, I know we've got a marketing section coming up, so I'll get into that on how you sell more directly from your website. And then you need to do that cross-border delivery. So obviously from Europe or anywhere, Australia's far away. That's, besides being a big country, it's a long way away. So if you're shipping in cross-border from somewhere else, potentially it's going to be a little bit more expensive, and potentially it's going to take a little bit longer than a domestic fulfillment. But you do get the benefit of not having to do the bulk shipments into Australia and not having inventory sitting on the ground here as well. So those are your kind of three options that you can work with. And I'm not going to talk much more, and I'll save my voice for questions that may come up around logistics and fulfillment at the end. So I'll hand back over to you, Carl, and see where the conversation goes.
Thank you very much for this very interesting contribution here. I think you have an interesting offering here for Austrian firms, and I think they will definitely go through your slides with a lot of attention. You have also mentioned that there are various options to work here in the market. And obviously one of the issues is here, what does this do to my tax position here? And I'm very glad that we could again Akru Felsers as a partner in this seminar, and particularly Brett Cox, who is a trusted advisor for the firm and for Austrian firms. Brett, I'm very glad that you're joining us today and give us a bit of an insight from the tech side on the issues of e-commerce from Europe to Australia.
Thank you very much, Carl, for that very kind introduction. I'd like to start by wishing everyone in Austria a good morning, and I guess in the words of the Truman Show, good afternoon, good evening, and good night to anyone who's coming from various other places around the world. So I'd like to start off with a brief history of our firm. When I say brief history, I don't mean short. Our firm has been around for 80 years. We're in our 80th year at the moment, and we were founded by Professor Gerhard Felser, who migrated from Austria back in 1941, and who, in fact, in the 60s was the Austrian Consul General in Australia. And our firm has continued to grow since over that time, and we've evolved into a full-service firm, recognised with multiple awards in Australia, and we've done that with a very strong connection with our Austrian roots, and we certainly enjoy working with and supporting the Austrian Advantage team here in Sydney. I guess onto today's topic of e-commerce. One of the first impacts which foreign businesses need to understand in the Australian marketplace is the Australian Goods and Services Tax, which is our equivalent to the European value-added tax, VAT. It's designed as a consumption tax, and in Australia it's generally a flat 10% rate on most products, although there are some GST-free goods and services, mostly around medicine, education, basic foods and items like that. I guess in VAT terms that would be zero rated. And we also have input taxed items which are exempt from tax. They are residential property and rents and financial services by banks and life insurance companies and the like. But most other goods are subject to GST. And I guess importantly, the first question is largely about the mandatory registration level. So in Australia, once GST turnover that's connected to Australia exceeds 75,000 per annum, there's a requirement to register for GST. And then once there's a GST registration, the e-commerce probably depends on dissecting between goods which are come into Australia or services and intangibles. So for goods which are coming into Australia, if it's a consignment above 1,000 Australian dollars, then GST will be payable at customs as part of the customs clearance process. And so that's paid by the importer. And there is an option to have that deferred at the point of entry so that it's paid monthly when the GST return or business activity statement is lodged. For goods which are below $1,000 that are being brought in, so probably direct sold from the foreign business, and if they're being sold to consumers in Australia, then there is a requirement for the vendor to charge GST if they are over the $75,000 per annum threshold. There is, of course, also services and intangible supplies or digital content, music, that sort of thing, where those supplies are being made by a non-resident business. If it's being supplied to a local consumer in Australia, so a private individual, then those items would also, like the low-value goods, be subjected to GST in the hands of the seller, whereas a business-to-business supply would often, if it's being made from a foreign business, not be subjected to GST in Australia if it's being supplied to a business. If the foreign business has a GST presence or an enterprise in Australia, so people or premises, then of course they would be required to charge GST on their goods. And when considering registration, there's of course a full GST registration that can be done for where input credits are going to be claimed on expenses or on the imported items, or if there's a supply direct from offshore, there's also a simplified GST registration process, which is a little simpler, but there's only the ability to pay the GST on the low value goods or the business to consumer supplies which are brought in. It's important to note that where an electronic distribution platform is being used or subscribed to, the tax system in Australia, the GST system, treats the platform itself as a supplier and imposes the obligations on the supplier. So if a business is running their own website from overseas, then they would have the obligation to pay. If they're selling through a global platform of some kind, then the platform provider may well have the obligation to pay the GST and provide all the relevant documentation as part of the customs process and to the consumer. So going on to income taxes, the sale of goods and services by a business would of course normally be taxable if it was done in Australia, and that unless of course it was a very small scale hobby, but as a business activity, I think we need to first look at whether there is the process involves selling into Australia or whether it's selling within Australia. So in the latter case, if there's selling inside Australia, there would normally be a taxable activity. There'd be a permanent establishment in tax words, because there would often be a place, or if there's a dependent agent making the sales. But if there's no permanent establishment in Australia, then usually under double tax treaties there is no taxing rights which Australia has on business profits, because taxing rights internationally are limited to where there's a permanent establishment in existence. If they're selling into Australia from a foreign business, and where there's no connection and no PE and no automated equipment or servers running in Australia, websites are fine. A website isn't considered by the OECD to be a permanent establishment generally. Then of course there'd be no tax in those cases. There has been a lot of press and a lot of impact of the digitalisation of the economy and this permanent establishment concept, which provides taxing rights only where there's a physical place or agent has been challenged. Some countries around the world have started to impose taxes on sales somewhere in the range of 3 to 6% quite often, and the OECD is trying to come up with a common process on that, trying to avoid that level of tax, and they've introduced some designs where there's profit sharing from the business, having a base profit in the home country and then sharing profits across the market economies. That's probably relatively complicated and also relatively new, and we're waiting for some clarity on that, and hopefully the countries through the OECD and the extended framework that they're operating under can come up with some solid grounding on that side. Of course, if the foreign business has global revenues of more than $1 billion, there are significant compliance issues and increased penalties in Australia, so it's very important for big businesses to get everything right. Those penalties can amount to more than $500,000 on a late lodgement of a GST return, so that's a significant impost that they face. And I guess whenever business is being conducted with Australia, if it's a business is being run within Australia, then of course there's local corporations law issues that a foreign company needs to register before conducting a business in Australia, although having a warehouse is not necessarily considered to be conducting a business in Australia. And being present in Australia often requires a choice around whether there's going to be a branch set up and trading through a branch, or whether there's going to be some sort of wholly owned subsidiary set up. And we're helping businesses all the time with those sorts of decisions and impacting the relevant tax laws and cross-border stuff as well. So thank you very much, and I look forward to talking a little more in the panel time.
Great, thank you very much for your explanations. It's a complex issue, but Austrian firms have overcome this in other markets, and I think Australia is fortunately not so different, even though we have seen the Netflix tax a couple of years ago. And as the market share of digital business is growing, I think we will see further development. So thank you very much for your ongoing expertise. And I'm pretty sure we will be in touch on this one also in the future, and I'm sure that Austrian firms will also be in touch with you on this in the future. I would like to come to our next expert speaker, Christiane Esch. Australia might speak English, but you might have heard in particular from Brad that Australian English is a bit different from what you're used maybe from the UK and the United States in particular. And it's not only the language, there are very different behavioral issues, but there's also structural issues. And I think the way e-commerce is conducted here, how people promote their products, how they promote their presence in the market is actually very peculiar. And I'm very glad that with Christiane, we could find a marketing expert who is willing to share her knowledge with us. And Christiane, in that sense, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carl, and a very good morning to everyone. Today, I'm looking forward to sharing my top 10 tips for e-commerce marketing in Australia. As a digital marketer, I'll share some statistics and information, and then how you can benefit from that information and help grow your e-commerce business. Firstly, ensuring that your payment gateway on your website accepts all of the most popular payment methods here in Australia. In Australia, cards are the #1 way to pay for Australian consumers online. I'm aware that it's quite common to pay on invoice in Austria. Commonly, invoices are only used in Australia for B2b, and we also refer to invoice payments as EFT or bank transfer. Card is definitely #1 in Australia, so that's Visa or MasterCard. PayPal is also exceptionally big, as are some instalment payment methods, which include Afterpay and Zip Pay. Essentially, that allows consumers to split the cost of a purchase over usually 4 payments or even 6 months in the case of Zip. So it's really important that your local version of your website does have these payment methods available to them. Apple Pay and also Google Pay are certainly becoming increasingly popular as well. Going along from that, in terms of payment, the overall checkout experience does need to be very smooth. So make sure that consumers can check out using their handy or their smartphone. And you can also use Google Analytics to get some really good information about your shoppers' habits, where, for example, they may be dropping off on your website, and you can use Google Analytics to find some really great opportunities where you can improve your website and your e-commerce marketing performance. It will also help you, and we'll get into this later on, but it will also help you look at your return on investment and make sure that your marketing is paying off as well. My third tip is to also make sure you have abandoned cart recovery tools or plugins that are on your website. A number of consumers, especially if they're on their phone, they may look to check out, look to purchase, get distracted, or something happens and they don't purchase. Having an abandoned cart recovery plugin will help you, exactly as it says, to recover those sales. And you may pick up an extra 10, 15, 20% of sales. So instead of losing those sales, it takes no time at all to set these plugins up, and it will automatically keep in touch with customers and help those consumers to make those purchases. Just going on to the next slide now. There's 4 very big events that happen in Australia every year from an e-commerce perspective. They happen in November, and they are Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Click Frenzy, and Singles Day. Many of these events have been imported from overseas, and of course, Amazon's been a big part of this as well. But these events are now quite common in Australia, especially in the lead up to Christmas. Make sure you have a sale planned and you're promoting that sale in November to make sure that you can take advantage of all of those special promotions. Another tip, tip number 5, is to spend time learning about common Australian brands that represent your industry. As you can see, the top e-commerce merchant segments in Australia, as seen below on the slide, are a little bit different to what you have in Austria. Our clothing and apparel, for example, are not number 1, whereas that is number 1 in Austria. So a little bit different in Australia, but you can check out some common brands in social media, find out where they market, how they market. This will give you some great benchmarks and something to aspire to, and hopefully some good ideas. But just make sure you never copy and always be your own brand when you do that as well. Just a bit of a quick market comparison here for you as well. So Australians are really used to seeing remarketing in terms of advertising, upsells, promotions, email marketing, suggested products, and recommendation engines. Again, another favorite from Amazon. This really does help to increase the average spend. The more that you can get from a customer, of course, will certainly boost your business. I would also like to highlight again the trend towards discount shopping. Australians love a bargain. We love a discount. So as you can see in the comparison, consider rewarding Australians with some promotions in return for their loyalty. Cafes in Australia, usually your 5th coffee is free. So you have a little card and they will stamp the card. Every 5th coffee is free. So you can do something similar with purchases as well. It may be 20% off when they come back and purchase again, encouraging those repeat sales. We will also share promotions with friends and family on social media when we see a good promotion come up. So it's certainly worth getting it out there and make sure you have a promotional plan in place for each of those promotions. Next, we have some very common platforms in Australia where you may be able to market and or sell your product. Of course, Facebook. You have Google ads, ads on YouTube. Gumtree is primarily a secondhand marketplace. However, there are ads that are integrated between eBay, Gumtree, Google. You can certainly get some ads on there as well. Depending on what type of product you're advertising, it may or may not be suitable for you. There's influencer marketing, of course, LinkedIn ads. If there's for example, a specialty or a particular role that you would like to target, your consumers are in a particular job role. Of course, Amazon, where you can not only sell products, but of course you can use Amazon to promote those same products as well, to get them ahead of those product searches and at the top of the page when people are looking for that particular product. Also, Instagram, you can purchase directly through Instagram, and also eBay as well. So really important to know what your product is, where your market is, and then you can pick which platform or multiple platforms that you may want to add, as well as your own website. I would also suggest that you make sure you build your reputation and gain some consumer trust. So that's using websites such as Trustpilot, Facebook reviews, productreview.com.au, and Google reviews. So build that reputation by getting consumer reviews, get them to review the product. Even video testimonials are quite popular as well. Just make sure you always respond to them and keep an eye on those reviews as well. You may also need to, from a trust perspective, revise your returns and warranty policies. In Australia, there is a common expectation of up to 30-day returns, even if people change their mind. In Austria, it is more common to have potentially a 7-day return policy, but much longer in Australia. The expectation, especially for fashion, would be around the 30-day period. So some quick social media statistics for you, because social media is a very common way of getting a new brand out there, generating awareness and some sales as well. So 71% of the population of Australia is on social media, and we are the 5th largest social media market in the world for advertising. And there's a good reason for that. So just keep in mind, and this is tip number 9, you can target almost any Australian over the age of 13 on social media. However, not all customers will be on all channels. So again, similar to platforms, look at your product and your market and use the platforms where they are. So go where the customer is. That's my best advice in terms of social media. Some costs as well, as I'm sure you'd like to know some rough costs. I will be very honest here. I have found these costs to be a little bit higher than what I would have expected and what I have seen. It definitely depends on the quality of your ad setup and how well customers respond to your ads, and also what market you're in. So if you're in a very competitive niche on LinkedIn, for example, those ad costs could be significantly higher. Certain keywords and products you will need to pay a lot more for. Some will be certainly less. So my final tip, and tip number 10, is to be very careful with your ROI. Be very careful that you're not spending more to make a sale than what you're making in revenue back. Make sure if you're advertising those products that you leverage every sale, collect email addresses, get people signed up to newsletters, really make the best out of every single sale. Just a couple of notes on social media as well. WhatsApp is also becoming much, much more popular in Australia. Australia is also a very diverse country in terms of our ethnicity and our connections to other countries. And WhatsApp is certainly quite big in terms of its uptake with migrant communities as well. So depending on your product and your target market, you may find that WhatsApp is another good channel that you may need to use as well. Although I do not believe that advertising is something you can do on WhatsApp. Pinterest and Twitter, however, have seen a reduction in users. So Pinterest and Twitter, whilst they were previously quite popular here, they are seeing a drop-off in the number of users. So that essentially brings me to the end of my presentation this evening. I do have the top 10 tips here for you that you can review after the presentation. So hopefully you can focus on one or all of these. The more of these tips that you can incorporate into your business, the more growth that you will certainly be able to expect in terms of your e-commerce business in Australia. But once again, thank you very much for your time this evening. And I will now hand back the control of the room to Carl. Thank you once again.
Christiane, thank you very much. Also, to put it in an Austrian context, I think it's always helpful to see a little bit numbers and figures when they give you a comparison. Yeah, Australia is a competitive market, as you have pointed out, with very specific rules. One thing that you mentioned is this return policies. I think Australia is here really very generous, and it's probably something that might not be common practice in international markets. But it's part of the sales story, and I think in terms of reviews and others, that is probably a key issue as well. We come to the question and answer session. Not surprisingly, Austria is exporting quite some products in the food and drink space. There were quite a few questions regarding online sales of alcoholic drinks, chilled fruits, chilled vegetables, and others. I think it's probably a question more to the logistic side of the panel here. Do you see this product category being sold internationally into the Australian market, or is this rather not as common? Kai, would you share your experience with that?
Yeah, for sure. So there's definitely restrictions if you're selling offshore and sending into Australia as a B2c package, so a cross-border shipment already sold to a consumer. You can sell in certain liquids. You can sell in certain supplements, pending, assuming they're legal and sort of approved. You can't send in steroids or illegal substances, but they are monitored quite closely. So you can't expect that if you were to send in, medicines that are in packaging, that they are going to get held up the first couple of times they come through quarantine, and they're going to be inspected. And if they're all fine, then you'll start seeing them held up less and less. Frozen goods, alcohol, any sort of perishables are a no-no, so they're definitely not allowed in. There's actually a list that I can dig up and send through, Carl, to you and your team, of the prohibited items for sending in from internationally. Now, if you are sending those in bulk to Australia and holding them in a warehouse here and fulfilling locally, that's a different story. You can do it. Some of them might require permits. Alcohols require certain other taxes and excises to be applied. So you can do it in bulk. Pretty much anything that's legal in Australia you can do with the right permits. But as a business to consumer transaction, there's definitely limits, and I'll take down a note to send you through, Carl, that list.
Okay, thank you very much for this. Yeah, I wanted to add here that obviously the Australian market knows different standards and norms, and this applies, as you have mentioned, medical products, pharmaceuticals, to foodstuffs, drinks, but also to machinery and sometimes electronic equipment. So please check in with us, and we will advise you on what the Australian labels or registration requirements would be for your products before you go ahead and start selling via e-commerce or on the digital channels. Another question from a viewer was regarding the sales via Amazon. It seems that this company is selling to Australia via Amazon USA, but wonders how they would actually be able to sell through Amazon Australia. Does this require additional registration, or what would be the process here? Alexander, can you maybe help us in?
Yeah, of course. So if you're already selling through Amazon US, Amazon Australia is sort of a separate platform. You would need to register for Amazon Australia through your Seller Central, or if you have an account manager, through the registration link I would send you. Essentially, it would set up as a in your drop-down menu in your Seller Central as a different platform. So once you have registered for it through that link or through the website, you would then just need to transfer your listings across from your US Seller Central or wherever Seller Central you have across to your Australian one, and then you'd be able to obviously do FBA or do your own fulfillment. If that's answered your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it clarifies it, and I think there was a bit of a confusion as Amazon tried to block the market here and sell in Australia exclusively for Amazon Australia, which wasn't actually accepted by the Australian clients. They wanted to have access to the international side of Amazon as well, and now there is this overlap of marketplaces that are competing here in some way. But thank you very much for filling in on this one. The other question here, and that goes to Brad. Somebody would like to know corporate tax. What would be the consequences of having an establishment here or a subsidiary here? What does the corporate tax regime look like?
Okay, the corporate tax rate in Australia is 30% for most companies, although for smaller companies that is reducing to 25% and is currently 26%. That's just as a matter of the global revenue of the business. So it depends on the global size, the tax rate in Australia. But yeah, 30% tax on profits. And if there's dividends that come back out of the Australian company to offshore, there's no withholding tax once company tax has been paid. So it's a single level tax.
Thank you very much. Several questions actually relate to the quantities that the companies would have to ship here in order to make it interesting for a logistics provider like Seiko, for instance, to deal with them. Is there any rule of thumb here, Kai, that you could share with us?
So not a general rule of thumb. It's obviously going to be based on a number of factors. So, you know, the commodity size, the value of the goods. So, you know, small items like a memory stick or a memory card, for instance, you can ship those quite easily using DHL service. Larger products, when you need to start getting into bulk freight and freight forwarding, it's going to attract more costs with, you know, the trucking and the pickup and commercial air freight or sea freight. So it really depends on what the commodity is. So sorry for being wishy-washy in my answer. What does happen though is we do have various consolidations with other customers of ours coming out of places like Germany, the UK, which isn't as helpful now as it was a couple of months ago. But you know, those consolidations allow shippers from overseas to send smaller amounts of goods without having to bear the entire cost of the shipment. So it really would, you know, you really need to see what you're planning on selling, what you think you need to hold. I might kind of actually ask Alex that question as well from an FBA point of view, what you think the quantity of goods you think you need to hold in an Amazon facility to make that worthwhile as well. And from there, you could kind of gauge on the shipping costs and whether it's worthwhile to ship that minimum quantity or you have to take a bigger gamble and ship a bigger quantity. Sorry for throwing you under the bus, Alex.
Yeah, no worries. So just to preface that, in the fulfillment centers in Australia, at the moment, when you send in your first shipment, it's pretty much set to 1,500 units of whatever you're sending. It doesn't really matter about the size of the product as long as it's not oversized. So that's a standard size inventory. So yeah, set at 1,500 for your very first shipment. After that, it then goes sort of on your last 12 weeks worth of sales. So the first 9 months is pretty much set, and then after that, yeah, it looks back at your last 12 week of sales, just basically to see if you are making enough sales to warrant more units. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for being so specific. A question probably for a lawyer, or in this case, actually for Christiane. Somebody was wondering regarding the data protection law in Australia and the usage of retargeting, remarketing cookies in online marketing for e-commerce. Is this as hot a potato as it is back in Europe?
It is. In Australia, we're only subject to the GDPR where it relates to consumers from Europe, which for most websites, you may have European customers. You can't really, unless it's geo-blocked, you wouldn't stop people from Europe visiting the website. So from that perspective, it is safer to have a website that is GDPR compliant. So I would say, whilst you may not be subject to it in Australia, essentially we do need to comply. In terms of cookies, all of that is changing with, for example, iOS 14, I believe it is, coming out for iPhone. Cookies and all of the tracking between Facebook and Google, there is just uproar in the marketplace at the moment. It's going to become very, very difficult to target clients. The only advice I can offer is, as I mentioned in the webinar, make sure you leverage every customer so you get them signed up to your newsletter, GDPR compliant, and handle their data in accordance with all the privacy policies. But make sure you get their email addresses, as unfortunately tracking online is going to become very, very difficult. There's no exact time frame yet as to when that ball is going to drop, but it is going to be huge for Google Ads and also for Facebook. it is going to be quite a considerable change coming up. But yes, certainly treat privacy as a number one concern. A lot of Australian customers are becoming more and more concerned with how their data is stored, how it is shared. People are used to remarketing, but again, it is subject to a lot of other, I guess, controls as well. Places like Google, for example, there's a lot of Google ads that you are simply not allowed to run. You cannot, for example, target people with a particular medical problem. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's a case of your individual business. So best to have a chat about how that relates to your specific product and how you would be marketing that product. But it is all about to change in, I would say, probably the next 3 to 6 months. So unfortunately, anything I say now is about to be changed very rapidly, but do be prepared for those changes coming up.
Perfect. Maybe I can enlist the whole panel again for e-commerce 2 to be continued in our winter then, when changes have really taken place. As you mentioned, yeah, so the data protection regulations from Europe has been watched very closely from Australia, very positively, I think, in many respects. And I think Australia is here on the catch up, and this will have an impact as well in this space. I've now seen we have very specific questions, some of them in the tax space, which might not be surprising for Brad and others. And it's actually also a bit reflecting what we are seeing here at the Austrian Trade Commission in Sydney. As these questions are so specific, please bear with us. We will obviously send them to the experts that they are concerning, and we will get back to you with a reply shortly. So please bear with me that we cannot ask this in this short period of time. I wanted to maybe mention one thing from our perspective, what we saw here in the Trade Commission. Obviously, quite a few Austrian companies are sourcing their products in China or other parts of Asia. And please don't forget there are free trade agreements here in place. So you can actually capitalize on customs-free entry into Australia if your products are originating from, let's say, China, Korea, or so Japan. And that's something that then needs, again, specific requirements in terms of logistics, etc. But it is possible, and we see it, and has been done successfully by Austrian companies. We are coming to the end of our seminar here. Please don't hesitate to contact us here in Sydney, but also reach out directly to our expert speakers. They have been kind enough to provide their contact data on their slides. I would like to conclude by thanking our panel for your contribution. We're getting close to 9 o'clock in the evening, so it's not that late yet, but it's dark. And I thank you for giving us your time here late in the evening. And I would like to thank all the Austrian participants that have been very numerous and very sticking with us through this conference. Thank you very much for your attention. Please go into the market, explore the market, and we would be pleased to be a partner in this undertaking. Schönen Tag nach Österreich, and have a good evening here in Australia. And Alexander in London, have a good day as well. Thank you very much for your attention.